In the sweltering jungle heat of South Vietnam, 1969, the province of Phuoc Tuy had become a silent crucible of tension and death. The war was no longer just about territory, it was about shadows, whispers, and the deadly dance between hunter and hunted. Beneath the towering canopy and tangled undergrowth, two enemies moved, rarely seeing each other, but always sensing. Nestled at the foot of the green hills was Nui Dat, the main base of the 1st Australian Task Force, 1 ATF. Heavily fortified and constantly patrolled, Nui Dat stood as a strategic outpost in a land where every path could lead to ambush. But beyond the perimeter fences, deeper into the uncharted jungle, lay the true domain of the Special Air Service Regiment, SAS, Australia's elite special forces. The men of SAS weren't ordinary soldiers. They didn't march in formations or wait for orders in the open. They moved silently, often in teams no larger than 4. Dressed in jungle greens, camouflaged head to toe, they were trained to observe, strike, and vanish. Their targets weren't always battalions, but information, maps, whispers in the dark, and key figures who disappeared with a single bullet. In late August 1969, intelligence reports indicated that a North Vietnamese Army (NVA) supply route had been reactivated near the rubber plantations north of Nui Dat. Recon drones were unreliable. The area was thick with tree cover and layered with old French trails long since reclaimed by the jungle. Satellite imagery was useless. The only way to confirm the report was to send in shadows. That's when a 4-man SAS patrol, led by Sergeant Bob Buick, received orders: infiltrate the jungle, locate the suspected trail, observe enemy movement, and report back. Engage only if necessary. Among them was Corporal Mitch Lanford, a seasoned sniper known for his ice-cold nerves and unmatched precision. Armed with a scoped M14, Mitch was the eye and trigger of the team. They knew the risks. These missions didn't come with backup. Radio contact was limited. If caught, help was hours away if it came at all. But that was the nature of their war, a war of patience, silence, and discipline. As the team slipped through the perimeter and vanished into the dense foliage, the noise of the base faded behind them. Ahead, nothing but the breath of the jungle, moist, hot, and full of unseen eyes. Every footstep was deliberate, every movement calculated. They would walk for hours, perhaps days, without uttering a single word. Communication was through hand signals, eye contact, and instinct. This was not the battlefield of Hollywood. There were no heroes' charges, no flags waving. Here, in the jungle of Phuoc Tuy, death wore no uniform and sometimes came without a sound, and for the men of the SAS, that was exactly how they liked it. They weren't looking for glory, they were looking for shadows, and they were ready to become one. By the second night, the SAS patrol was deep within enemy-held territory. The jungle here was thicker, darker. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Each man carried over 40 kilograms of gear, rifles, rations, radios, and explosives, but their movements were ghost-like. No twigs snapped beneath their boots, no metal clinked, only the soft rustle of leaves and the rhythm of their controlled breathing. Sergeant Bob Buick raised a closed fist. The team froze. Without a word, they dropped into cover and scanned the trail ahead. There it was, fresh footprints in the mud, slightly smudged by morning dew. Alongside them, the faint outline of a drag mark, possibly a radio or ammunition crate. A sign of a small logistics unit. Buick knelt beside the track, fingers brushing over a discarded cigarette butt. It was still warm. They weren't far. Corporal Mitch Lanford, the team's sniper, climbed into a banyan tree, positioning himself on a high branch with perfect line of sight. Through his scope, he swept the trail slowly. Nothing, just layers of green and shifting shadows. But his instincts told him it was only a matter of time. For hours, the team remained motionless, camouflaged so thoroughly that even a few passing birds landed near them without hesitation. Mitch adjusted his grip on the rifle. He didn't blink much. His eyes moved like a cat's, measuring distance, adjusting for wind, humidity, even the curve of the terrain. Then they appeared. A column of NVA soldiers, about 15 strong, emerged silently from the eastern tree line, moving along the trail. No talking, no laughing. Just purposeful, silent motion. Most carried rifles, but one man at the center bore a larger pack of field radio, the tall antenna poking up behind his head like a flag. Mitch exhaled quietly. That was the one. He marked the terrain, estimated the wind, checked distance, then waited. But the mission was not to engage, not yet. Unless they were discovered, they were to observe and report. Buick scribbled notes into a waterproof pad. 15 plus NVA. Logistics unit. Radio op center position. Movement southbound. Suddenly, one of the rear soldiers stopped. He scanned the jungle, eyes narrowing. His head tilted slightly. Had he seen something? A glint? A shadow? Mitch's heart rate barely changed. His finger curled slowly over the trigger, just in case. The man lingered, then shook his head and moved on. The moment passed. Once the last soldier vanished into the trees, Buick gave a silent signal. They would shadow the unit, track them deeper, and wait for the perfect moment. Intel, this clear, was rare. If they could follow undetected, they might find a supply base, or even a command post. But one wrong move could expose them all. As the jungle closed back over the trail, the four shadows slipped back into motion. This was the game they played. Death just a whisper away, and silence their only shield. The sniper adjusted his rifle and followed. The hunt had truly begun. By the third day, the SAS team had tracked the NVA column across nearly 12 kilometers of unforgiving jungle terrain. The route twisted through thick vines, narrow ridgelines, and shallow creek beds. It was slow, deliberate progress for both hunter and prey. The patrol moved only at dawn and dusk, pausing during midday heat to observe and stay hidden. They drank from purification tablets and ate cold rations in silence. Every sound in the forest felt amplified. The flapping of birds, the distant crack of bamboo, even their own heartbeats. By late afternoon, they spotted signs of something big, new trails converging, overhead cover built from palm fronds and freshly dug trenches. Sergeant Buick signaled a halt. The NVA were not just passing through. They were establishing a forward supply point. Corporal Mitch Lanford, the sniper, scaled a large fig tree for a better view. From his perch, hidden behind thick leaves, he could just make out the edges of a camouflaged base, partially dug into a hillside clearing. Through his scope, he saw two guards posted, rifles slung lazily, smoking and chatting. Then a third man appeared, the same NVA radio operator they had seen earlier, easily identified by his distinctive gear. He entered a tent-like structure near the center of the camp. Mitch adjusted his position, heart steady, breathing calm. A clear shot from here would be difficult. The range was nearly 300 meters, with foliage in between. Wind was minimal, but humidity could distort the path. It would require perfect timing and absolute precision. Meanwhile, on the ground, Sergeant Buick studied the map and made a call over encrypted radio to base, possible logistics hub, requesting artillery coordinates, will mark position if engagement necessary. But it was getting late. The light was fading, and any move now could risk exposing the team. Buick's decision was clear. They would wait until dawn. Night came like a curtain, thick and heavy. The SAS team took shifts sleeping, always one man awake, always listening. At 0400 hours, Mitch was back in the tree, scope already zeroed in. Through his thermal lens, faint body heat signatures glowed in the darkness. The radio man emerged again, this time carrying documents, flanked by another NVA officer. They were reviewing something, likely orders or maps. They paused near the edge of the clearing. Mitch's finger tightened. Then it happened. A young NVA soldier, no older than 18, stepped into the brush near the team's position, possibly to relieve himself. He froze. His eyes locked onto something, a glint of metal, a breath, a footprint. Something had betrayed them. He turned to raise the alarm. Mitch didn't wait. One shot. The boy dropped. The jungle shattered with movement. Shouts erupted from the camp. The two officers turned, confused. Second shot clean hit to the radio man's chest. Buick shouted, "Fall back! We're made!" The jungle, which had held its breath for days, now roared to life. Tracers lit the treetops. Claymores were triggered. The hunters had become the hunted, but the sniper had struck. And now, it was a race to disappear. The first bullet had dropped the boy. The second shattered the chest of the NVA radio man. Then the jungle exploded. Red tracer rounds ripped through the dark like burning arrows. Shouts in Vietnamese echoed from the clearing. Spotlights flared. Sirens wailed. The element of surprise was gone. Now it was survival. "Move!" Sergeant Buick's voice was low but firm, calm, even under fire. The team scattered in practiced motion, vanishing into the tree line. Claymore mines they'd planted earlier roared to life, cutting off the first wave of NVA troops that gave chase. Screams echoed, followed by silence. But the enemy was trained and angry. Reinforcements would come fast. Corporal Mitch Lanford, the sniper, took the rear. He moved swiftly, rifle slung, pistol drawn. There was no time for long shots now, only speed and silence. Each man had memorized the route to the extraction point, an LZ, nearly 2 kilometers southwest, just beyond a steep ravine. The terrain would slow the pursuers, but it would also test the team's endurance. As they moved, Sergeant Buick threw off false trails, boot prints leading in wrong directions, bait gear strapped to tree limbs. One man dropped a timed flare charge in a cave to mimic radio chatter, anything to throw the enemy off. Still, they weren't alone. Within 20 minutes, the sound of boots crashing through brush grew louder. The NVA were pursuing in staggered teams, sweeping wide, flanking. The team reached a narrow stream. They entered silently, moving through the water for over 200 meters to erase scent trails. Leeches clung to their arms. Mosquitoes clouded their vision. Still, no one complained. No one panicked. At a small ridge, the patrol halted. Mitch climbed a tree for overwatch while the others caught their breath. Through the scope, he spotted movement 4 NVA soldiers with dogs, less than 150 meters behind. The dogs were sniffing, ears twitching. Danger was seconds away. Mitch steadied his aim, but Buick touched his shoulder. Not yet. Then the wind shifted. The dogs barked once and charged. "Contact left," one of the men hissed. This time, Mitch fired. 2 shots, 2 men down. A third dropped from a grenade tossed downslope. The fourth turned and ran, but the barking had already alerted others. "Go loud," Buick ordered grimly. The jungle erupted again. Controlled bursts of automatic fire drove the remaining pursuers into cover. But the firefight wouldn't last. Ammunition was limited. The team needed to disappear again. They pushed hard, every step a gamble between exhaustion and survival. At last, the trees thinned, revealing a muddy clearing marked with orange smoke, the extraction zone. Overhead, the thrum of rotor blades cut through the gunfire. A U-81 Huey helicopter came into view, skimming low. As the team sprinted for the chopper, bullets snapped past their heads. One man stumbled, hit in the leg, but the others pulled him up. They piled into the bay as the door gunner opened fire, shredding the jungle behind them. The Huey lifted, banking hard. The jungle receded. They had made it out. Just barely. But the war was far from over. The helicopter's rhythmic thumping faded as the Huey landed back at Nui Dat, kicking up clouds of dust and rotor wash. Medics rushed in, lifting the wounded SAS trooper onto a stretcher. He was stable, lucky. The bullet had passed clean through his thigh, missing the artery by inches. The remaining 3 men jumped down silently, their gear soaked with sweat and mud, faces unreadable beneath grime and camouflage paint. No one spoke. In the SAS, there were no cheers, no pats on the back. There was only the mission and whether it had been completed. They were immediately escorted to a secure debriefing room within the base. Inside, a fan spun lazily overhead. The room was dimly lit, sparsely furnished. Intelligence officers, 1 Australian and 1 American, waited with clipboards and coffee. Sergeant Bob Buick began the debrief. His voice was low, clipped, professional. He recounted the insertion, the tracking, the confirmation of the NVA logistics site, and the sniper engagement that had forced the team to abort. Corporal Mitch Lanford added his account, particularly the confirmed kill of the radio operator, and the recovery of a document satchel during their final escape retrieved from the downed NVA officer by sheer instinct, even under fire. The officers leaned forward. Inside the weathered leather case were hand-drawn supply routes, delivery timetables, and unit positions scrawled in faded blue ink. One map contained circled grid references, possibly locations of ammunition caches or command bunkers along the Cambodian border. It was gold. This, said the American officer, tapping the map, could change the tempo of operations across the entire southern corridor. You boys just bought us a few weeks of breathing room. But the team barely nodded. They were exhausted, physically, mentally, and more than anything, emotionally. Taking lives, even clean shots, wasn't as clean inside the soul. Outside, the sun began to rise over the low hills, casting long shadows across the red dirt. The base was coming to life. Mechanics, starting engines, infantrymen jogging in formation, a distant chopper lifting off. Back in the team's quarters, Mitch sat on his cot, rifle stripped and drying beside him. He stared at nothing, replaying the moment the young NVA soldier spotted them, his face barely more than a boy, the way he turned to shout, the way Mitch pulled the trigger without hesitation. One shot, one life, one decision. That was the cost of silence. He didn't regret it. It had saved the team. But it stayed with him. The enemy may be nameless, but their faces lingered. Not every kill was clean in the mind. Buick entered the room quietly and tossed Mitch a canteen. "You did your job," he said, sitting across from him. Mitch nodded once. "I know." They both fell into silence again. Outside, war moved on. Orders were being drawn, new missions planned, but for now, the shadows rested,